Welcome to Mrs. E English Skills. I'm Mrs. E, and today we're looking at GCSE English Language, Paper 1, Question 2. How the writer uses language. How do writers achieve effects? A writer creates impressions in the reader's mind. They do this and influence us through inferences, which just means suggestions they make. They appeal to and influence our senses through the use of writing techniques. So, in order to explain and analyse how writers achieve effects, you need to comment on the ways writers deliberately use writing techniques to create impressions. Let's look at Paper 1, Question 2. This question is about the effects of language on the reader, and you will need to write about how the language influences the reader. So let's look at a sample. Look in detail at lines 11 to 20 of the source. How does the writer use language to describe the atmosphere in the room? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. So first of all, you're directed to a set of lines. And in the AQA exam papers, this set of lines will be above question 2. Then you're asked, how does the writer use language to describe the atmosphere in the room? I would suggest you underline the key words. So the key words here are how, the language, and atmosphere. So the question requires you to find language features and techniques that go some way to describing what the atmosphere is like. Now, atmosphere could be tense, warm, friendly, inviting, scary. It doesn't matter what it is, you will get a feeling for that when you're reading it. So what you need to do is you need to highlight anything that gives you that indication of atmosphere. Then look at those pieces of text you've highlighted and see if you can identify any language devices or features such as adjectives, adverbs, simile, metaphor. Then you've got to ensure you explain why the writer's chosen to use them and the effect it has on you as a reader and how successful it is in describing the atmosphere. The bullet points at the end will be the same no matter what question 2 you're given, but essentially that just means use the point evidence explain format that we looked at in the last session and make sure that you've picked examples and you've explained those examples in order to answer the question. Let's talk about identifying language devices or techniques or features. When analysing an exam text for a question concerning language, the identification of language devices is a key component for achieving high grades. Writers use these to achieve several outcomes, such as to create imagery, to imply, infer or suggest something, to create tension or a sense of atmosphere, and it's vital to understand a wide variety of language devices in order to locate and comment on them in the exams. However, it's not useful to identify language devices for the sake of identifying language devices, and we call this technique train spotting. If you say, there's a simile here, there's a rhetorical question there, there's personification, but if you do identify them in that way and they have no relevance to the question, so you pick up a simile that doesn't describe the atmosphere, you will not get any extra marks for that. So be aware of this, which is why I always say to my students, highlight the text first without thinking about language techniques and features to find the sections that you think describe the atmosphere, to use the question we've just looked at as an example. Then, once you've highlighted the words and phrases, re-look at them and think, are there any language features techniques in here that I can identify? And use those examples, and you'll only need 3 to answer the question. And that way, you're not going to lose any marks for irrelevant identification of devices, features and techniques. So let's look at these language features, starting with descriptive language features. So when you think of descriptive language features, I want you to think a soap, Sam, alliteration, similes, onomatopoeia, adjectives, personification, senses, adverbs and metaphors. So let's start to look at language devices, starting with imagery. And imagery just means when you're able to picture what's being described. So we'll start off with simile, which is a figure of speech that expresses a resemblance between different things, using the words like or as. For example, as cold as snow. Here, the writer wants you to think about snow and imagine how cold that feels and apply that to whatever it is they are describing. It emphasises the description, and that's a useful technique in order to really allow your reader to visualise and imagine that scene. Next we have metaphor, which is a figure of speech comparing one thing to another by saying it is that other thing. So it's not like the other thing, like a simile, it is the other thing. For example, you are driving me up the wall. You're not literally driving me in a car up a wall, but this is trying to suggest that you are really annoying me, you're making me mad, you're making me angry, you're getting on my nerves. But it's obviously a much more descriptive and effective way of suggesting that. And it's making the reader think about what it means and actively taking an interest in reading the piece of text. Then finally, using the senses. So we're looking at your 5 senses here. So the writer could be describing what you can hear, see, smell, taste and touch. For example, the smoke was thick and black as it rose from the earth, accompanied by the stench of scorched wood. So you get the full rounded experience. Not only can you see what's happening, the smoke thick and black and what it looks like, but you can smell that stench. So scorched wood, if you've ever smelt scorched wood, which you more than likely have, the writer wants you to imagine that smell and it to flood your senses as you're reading the text and you become enveloped in that scene. Let's look at some more descriptive devices, starting with onomatopoeia. I remember it as onomatopoeia to help me spell it, but it's a word that sounds like the sound you're describing. So examples are slap, pop, hiss. And what this does, it allows your reader to hear the scene as well as see the scene. So it employs the sense of hearing. Next we have alliteration, where we have 2 or more words close together in the sentence that begin with the same letter. For example, decaying daffodils danced in the distance. This can emphasize a description, as it does for this example, or it can add a rhythm in order to make whatever's being stated memorable, which is very useful in advertisements. Next we have personification, and the clue is in the title, personification, person, and it's when we describe something that is not a person as if it were. For example, daffodils danced, and as the car crept forward, its engine whimpered in despair. We as humans, as people, can identify with dancing and creeping and all the emotions that go with that. We can also identify with why someone would whimper and the emotion of despair. And this helps us understand the meaning in the text and therefore become, again, enveloped in the story. Lastly, we have the two word classes. So we have adjectives, words that describe the noun. A noun is a person, place, or thing. And my example is the enormous yellow bus. So enormous and yellow are our adjectives, and they describe the bus, which is our noun. And adverbs are words that describe the verb. A verb is a doing word or an action word. If you've seen my videos on sentence structure, you'll know this already, but if not, check out my basic English skills playlist to upskill in this area. Every video in that playlist is useful for GCSE English language and will really help you prepare for these exams. So an example or two examples of adverbs we have: I walked slowly down the road and he laughed wickedly at the children. So slowly and wickedly are our adverbs, and walked and laughed are our verbs. Now let's look at persuasive language features. For this, I'd like you to think a red forest, alliteration, rhetorical questions, emotive language, direct address, facts, opinions, repetition, experts, statistics, and triples. Let's look at some examples. We've already talked about alliteration, and the example I used was decaying daffodils danced in the distance. Any questions in text are rhetorical. Rhetorical questions encourage readers to think about their own circumstances or beliefs in relation to what is being discussed. Emotive language uses words that evoke an emotional reaction, good or bad. Direct address involve the reader by using personal pronouns such as you, we, and us to pull the reader into the argument or the debate. Facts are statements that can be proven and are usually used as evidence to back up opinions, which are based on a person's own beliefs or views and cannot be proven. Repetition is when you repeat a word to add emphasis and is often called brainwashing, as if something is said often enough, it tends to stick in the mind. Expert opinions are quotes or statements from experts in the field of the topic of the text, and are used as evidence to back up opinions, arguments, or claims. Statistics work the same as facts, but they are numerical data, not statements. And triples are used to reinforce an idea or emphasize something. Let's look at a sample question and text, taken from Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. How does the writer use language to describe the effects of the weather? The wind came in gusts, at times shaking the coach as it travelled round the bend of the road, and in the exposed places on the high ground it blew with such force that the whole body of the coach trembled and swayed, rocking between the high wheels like a drunken man. The driver, muffled in a greatcoat to his ears, bent almost double in his seat in a faint attempt to gain shelter from his own shoulders, while the dispirited horses plodded sullenly to his command, too broken by the wind and rain to feel the whip, that now and again cracked above their heads, while it swung beneath the numb fingers of the driver. The wheels of the coach creaked and groaned as they sank into the ruts on the road, and sometimes they flung up the soft spattered mud against the windows, where it mingled with the constant driving rain, and whatever view there might have been of the countryside was hopelessly obscured. I've highlighted some parts of this text, and within those parts there are 3 language features. Can you have a go at identifying these language features and maybe some description as to how they describe the effects of the weather? I'll pause this video here to have a go before I reveal the answers. Okay, let's look at the answers. So, like a drunken man. This is a simile, and it effectively describes the force of the wind which renders the coach incapable of controlling movement, just like a person intoxicated with alcohol. When the horses are described as too broken by the wind and rain to feel the whip, the horses aren't actually broken. So this is a metaphor, but it suggests the horses are almost unable to carry on, and when contrasted with the whip, the wind and the rain sound more painful and agonizing, as the horses cannot feel the whip, but are broken by the weather. And when the wheels of the coach creaked and groaned, this is onomatopoeia, because it evokes the sounds made by the coach wheels while contending with the weather, and it suggests that they are at breaking point and may fall apart. How did you do? Okay, so now let's look at a sample answer using the point, evidence, explain structure that we looked at in the previous session. So my points will be coloured in red, my evidence will be coloured in green, and my explain will be coloured in blue. The writer uses the simile, like a drunken man, to effectively describe the force of the wind, which renders the coach incapable of controlling movement, just like a person intoxicated with alcohol. The metaphorical depiction of the horses being too broken by the wind and rain to feel the whip suggests they are almost unable to carry on. When contrasted with the whip, the wind and rain sound more painful and agonizing, as the usual sting from the whip cannot be felt. Finally, the writer uses onomatopoeia to evoke the sounds made by the coach wheels when stating they creaked and groaned while contending with the weather, implying they are at breaking point and may fall apart. Here we have effectively answered the question. We've given a point, evidence and explain times 3. This is an okay answer, but how can we increase our grade? We can add develop. So instead of point, evidence, explain, we'll have point, evidence, explain, develop, PED. So this just extends, develops, or concludes each point, and it increases the quality of your answer. So for my first point, I could add, the reader may start to worry about the coach and its occupants. For my second point, I could add, the weather is depicted as a more severe sensation, gaining pity from the reader for the poor animals. And for my final point, I could add, the personification of the coach groaning allows the reader to identify with and feel sorry for the coach whilst fighting against the adverse weather. What do you think? Could you do this in your own answers? Practice this with any mock exams or mock questions that you attempt at home in preparation for your exams. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to check out the other videos in this playlist in order to prepare yourself effectively for your AQA GCSE English language exams. If you've got a question, just add it in the comment section and I'll answer as best I can. And don't forget to subscribe in order to allow me to make more videos to continue to help people with their English skills. I'm Mrs. E, and I'll see you soon.